my name is Michael. I'm 52 years old, and not long ago I realized that the price of peace is sometimes absolute war. People say family is sacred, but I learned that some relatives are nothing more than parasites who use blood as an excuse to bleed you dry. Imagine that after 10 years of marriage, after building a home and supporting your wife through every step of her career, you find a manila envelope sitting on the dining table. It didn't contain gratitude or a love letter. It was a detailed invoice. My mother-in-law, that woman who always smiled at me with porcelain-like falseness, was demanding a lifetime monthly payment as reimbursement for raising the woman who now slept beside me. She didn't see her daughter as a human being, but as an investment that I, simply for being her husband, was now expected to start paying off. The most terrifying part wasn't her ambition, but the complicit silence of my wife when the envelope was opened. In that moment, as I watched the glint of greed in my mother-in-law's eyes and the emptiness in the gaze of the woman I loved, I knew my life as I knew it was over. But my strategy was only beginning. The years have given me the patience of a hunter and the coldness of someone who has nothing left to lose. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how that manila envelope ended up on my table, I need to explain who I was before everything began to rot. I had been married to Emily for 12 years. She was always a brilliant woman, or at least that's what I like to believe. When we met, I was already an established man. I had worked hard in logistics and legal consulting, building a solid estate with the discipline that only years and mistakes can teach. Emily was younger, ambitious, and came from a family that, according to her, had made heroic sacrifices to give her an education. That phrase, heroic sacrifices, would repeat like a mantra in my home for more than a decade. My relationship with Emily was, on the surface, perfect. I was the provider, the emotional pillar, the man who solved every problem before she even noticed it existed. I was proud of that. My mistake was confusing support with overprotection. I paid for her master's degree, financed her businesses that never took off, and maintained a lifestyle she never could have afforded on her own. I did all of this out of love, or what I believed love was back then. But deep down, there was always a shadow. Her mother, Margaret. Margaret is the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes the air feel heavier. Always elegant, wearing jewelry that I myself had given her on birthdays, and carrying a smile that never reaches her eyes. From day one, I felt she analyzed me not as a son-in-law but as a bank account. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, ended with Margaret talking about how hard it was to be a single mother, how much she worked cleaning houses, and how Emily owed her everything she was. I would nod, pour her more wine, and think it was simply the bitterness of old age. How wrong I was. The atmosphere in my home began to change in subtle ways. Emily started insisting that we needed to be more generous with her mother. It was no longer enough to invite her on vacations or pay her medical bills. Emily began talking about a moral debt. I worked 10, 12 hours a day, managing contracts and crises, and when I came home, instead of peace, I found a list of Margaret's new needs. A new car because hers was embarrassing, a complete kitchen renovation, a trip to Europe to heal her spirit. I'm a man of numbers, analytical by nature. I began to notice that the money I transferred to our joint account was disappearing faster than usual. Emily became evasive. Whenever I asked about expenses, she grew defensive, accusing me of being controlling or of not appreciating her mother's effort in turning her into the woman I supposedly loved. That was her favorite trap, using my feelings as a weapon to justify her lack of boundaries. At 52, you believe you've seen everything, that no one can surprise you with a new kind of low. But the emotional climate in my house was one of silent tension. I would retreat to my office reviewing spreadsheets while the two of them whispered in the living room. I could feel their eyes on my back. It was as if they were measuring me, calculating how much more they could stretch the rope before it snapped. And still I stayed, fulfilling my role as the protective husband, believing that if I gave them enough, they would eventually stop. I didn't realize I was feeding a monster that knew no satisfaction. Margaret didn't want help. She wanted compensation. She believed her daughter was property she had leased to me, and that I had stopped paying the installments. That mentality of ownership, of seeing people as financial assets, was something I couldn't comprehend until it was too late. My life was stable, my business was thriving, but the ground beneath my feet was turning into quicksand. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a strong man, but a tired one. I thought this was simply the natural course of life, that at this age, you endure your in-laws' eccentricities for the sake of marriage. How naive I was. I was surrounded by predators dressed in silk, waiting for the exact moment to strike. They made me believe I was the leader of the pack, when in reality I was just the prey they were fattening for the feast. That was my reality before the fall, a fragile balance sustained by lies and my own denial. The final crack opened on a Tuesday night. I remember the sound of the wall clock, a metallic ticking that seemed to mark the rhythm of my own execution. Emily sat across from me, avoiding eye contact, while Margaret finished pouring herself a glass of wine I had paid 3 times more for than she would ever admit. The manila envelope lay there, resting on the white tablecloth like a silent insult. "Open it, Michael," Margaret said with a calmness that froze my blood. "It's time we formalize things. We can't keep living off your unpredictable charity. We need security." I picked up the envelope. My fingers, used to handling million-dollar contracts, didn't tremble. When I pulled out the papers, the first thing I saw was a spreadsheet, cold, detailed, and perverse. My mother-in-law had quantified every year of Emily's life before she met me. Food, clothing, primary education, even the cost of vaccines and Christmas toys. Below that, an interest calculation based on accumulated inflation. The total was absurd, but what truly stopped my heart was the final proposal, a mandatory monthly transfer of 20% of my net income to a private account in Margaret's name. "What is this, Emily?" I asked, keeping my voice low, almost a whisper. She didn't look at me. She simply played with her wedding ring against a diamond I had given her on our 10th anniversary. "My mother sacrificed her youth for me, Michael. Now that you and I are doing well, it's only fair that she recovers her investment. It's the least a man of your position should do for family." "Investment?" I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "You're talking about your own upbringing as if you were a debt I have to settle," Margaret intervened, tapping the table lightly with her perfectly manicured nails. "Don't misunderstand, son-in-law. You took the finished product, I did the hard work. For years I deprived myself of luxuries so she could become the refined woman you have today. That education, that class, it costs money. And now that you control her life, you have to pay the bill. It's a moral contract, but my lawyers say we can make it legal if you decide to be difficult." A surge of heat stabbed my chest, but I didn't explode. My discipline forced me to observe. I looked at Emily, searching for a trace of shame, a spark of the woman I had fallen in love with. I found nothing, only ambition, mirroring her mother's. In that moment, I understood that Emily wasn't the victim of a manipulative mother. She was her partner. "If you don't sign the family compensation agreement," Margaret continued, pulling a pen from her purse, "Emily will begin divorce proceedings. And believe me, between community property laws and the evidence we've collected about your supposed emotional neglect, the monthly payment in this envelope will look like pocket change compared to what we'll take from you in court." The humiliation wasn't the demand for money. It was realizing they had been planning this for months. While I worked to secure our future, they were reviewing my bank statements and consulting lawyers to figure out how to dismantle my life. Emily finally lifted her eyes. There was no love in them, only calculation. "Sign it, Michael. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Mom deserves to live with dignity, and you have more than enough. If you truly love me, this small adjustment shouldn't matter." I stood up without saying a word. I walked to the window and looked out into the darkness of the street. I felt hollow, as if my vital organs had been removed without anesthesia. Everything I had built, the home, the trust, the idea of a peaceful old age, vanished in 10 minutes of transactional conversation. They thought they had me cornered. They believed my fear of loneliness or my sense of duty would force me to give in. "I'm not signing anything today," I said, my back still turned. "You have until Friday," Margaret declared triumphantly. "Or Friday will be the day you receive the lawsuit. Think carefully. You have a lot to lose: your house, your reputation, and your wife." That night, Emily didn't sleep in our bedroom. She moved into the guest room, locking the door. It was a symbolic expulsion from my own marriage. I lay alone in our bed, surrounded by the silence of a house that no longer belonged to me emotionally. I had lost my partner, but in the middle of that desolation, something new began to grow inside me. It wasn't hatred. Hatred is loud and careless. It was a cold determination. They wanted money. They wanted to use the law to strip me of everything I had earned. Very well. If they wanted a game of numbers and laws, I would give them the performance of their lives. But first, I had to let them feel like winners. I had to let them grow confident. The betrayal had been total, and the response would be final. I spent the next 3 days immersed in absolute silence. They interpreted my quietness as the defeat of a broken man, but my mind was operating at a speed I hadn't experienced since my best years in consulting. I knew that to defeat 2 predators, brute force wouldn't work. I had to use their own greed as the bait for their downfall. They wanted a war of assets, and I was going to give them a lesson in financial engineering. I called an old contact, a man named Daniel, who specialized in forensic audits and asset protection. We met in a neutral location, far from any familiar eyes. I didn't ask him to hide money. That would be illegal and easy to trace. I asked him to help me uncover the truth Emily and her mother had buried under years of victimhood. "Michael, if you do this, there's no going back," Daniel told me as he reviewed the documents I had taken from the safe in my office. "I'm not looking to go back," I replied. "I'm looking for justice." We discovered something that not even I, with all my analytical coldness, had suspected. Margaret was not the selfless mother who cleaned houses to educate her daughter. Through a deep investigation into old records, Daniel found that Margaret had received a substantial inheritance from Emily's grandfather 20 years ago, money she squandered on gambling and failed investments overseas. The entire story of heroic sacrifice was a fiction designed to manipulate her daughter's guilt, and later my wallet. Margaret hadn't invested in her daughter. She had used her daughter to hide her own financial irresponsibility. But the most lethal discovery was about Emily. My wife, the woman asking me for moral compensation, had been diverting funds from our family business into a mirror account in her mother's name. These weren't small amounts. Over the last 3 years, they had extracted enough to constitute criminal fraud. I had the receipts, the digital signatures, and the transfer records. They weren't just demanding a monthly payment. They had already been stealing from me in advance. My plan became surgical. I wasn't going to file for divorce yet. I was going to wait for Margaret's siblings' silver anniversary celebration, a massive family event scheduled for the following Saturday. It was the perfect stage. Extended family, influential friends and business associates Margaret worked so hard to impress with her grand lady facade. During those days, I pretended weakness. I told Emily I was seriously considering the monthly payment, but needed her help organizing the paperwork so it could be legally tax-deductible. Believing herself victorious, she let her guard down. She became strangely kind, almost affectionate, a gesture that made me nauseous but that I accepted with a rehearsed smile. She even suggested that we officially announce the family support agreement during the party so everyone could see what a good man I was. "It's best for your image, Michael," she told me, gently touching my arm with a coldness that no longer affected me. "Everyone will know you're a man who values the family that gave you your wife." I nodded, pretending resignation. Meanwhile, I prepared a special gift for the party. It wasn't jewelry or a check. It was a USB drive and a series of numbered folders bearing legal certification seals. I hired a private security team, not to protect me, but to ensure that no one could shut down the venue's projection system until I finished speaking. Every move was calculated. Patience is a virtue cultivated with age, and at 52, I knew that timing matters more than intention. Margaret and Emily believed they were about to collect the grand prize of their long con. They didn't realize they were walking straight into a public execution of their reputation. On Friday night before the party, we had dinner in silence. Margaret toasted to the future. I raised my glass and drank, staring into the eyes of the woman who had sold me for a fabricated bill of upbringing. In my mind, every piece on the board was in place. They had written the script of my humiliation, but I had taken control of the final production. Revenge, when rational, leaves no room for regret. I was ready for the climax. The party hall was packed. There were more than 100 people, relatives, former partners, and all those social friends Margaret was so desperate to impress. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the kind of hypocrisy only other people's money can buy. Emily wore a new dress, paid for with my card, moving among the guests with the confidence of someone who already felt like the owner of the prize. Margaret, meanwhile, ruled from the main table, accepting compliments for the excellent upbringing of her daughter. When the time for toasts arrived, Emily gave me a signal. It was the agreed cue. I walked up to the small stage with a calm many mistook for respect. The murmur in the room faded. "Good evening, everyone," I began, adjusting the microphone. "As many of you know, today we're not only celebrating family, but also a very special agreement that my mother-in-law, Margaret, and my wife, Emily, have proposed to honor the past." Margaret smiled from her seat, nodding confidently, already savoring the public recognition and the money she believed was secured. Emily looked at me with a mixture of triumph and relief. "A few days ago, Margaret handed me an invoice," I continued, and the silence became absolute. "An invoice for raising Emily. She believes that a mother's love has a price, a monthly reimbursement that I, as her husband, must pay. And after reviewing it with my lawyers and auditors, I've decided they're right. It's time for the accounts to be settled." At that moment, I signaled to the technician I had personally hired. The large screen behind me, which until then displayed family photos, abruptly changed. The first document appeared, the inheritance Margaret had squandered in casinos years earlier. A collective gasp filled the room. "Here we see the first heroic sacrifice," I said coldly. "The fortune Margaret received and hid from her own daughter to play the victim and demand money today. But let's not stop there." I moved to the next slide. Bank transfer records from our joint account to Margaret's private account appeared. The amounts were staggering. Emily's face turned pale, almost grey. She tried to stand, but one of my security men stepped discreetly into her path, preventing her from reaching the stage. "My wife and my mother-in-law demanded payment for upbringing, while they had already been systematically stealing more than $300,000 from me over the past 3 years, I said, looking directly at Margaret, whose smile had turned into a mask of terror. "What you see on the screen isn't a family debt. It's a scheme of fraud and breach of trust." The room erupted into whispers and looks of contempt toward the main table. The cousins, uncles, and friends who had once flattered them now physically distanced themselves. Margaret's reputation as a grand lady was disintegrating in real time before the people who mattered most to her. "Here are the lawsuits," I said, lifting a blue folder. "One for fraud against Margaret and another, a divorce filing for criminal misconduct, against Emily. There will be no monthly payment, Margaret. What there will be is a seizure of your house and every asset you purchased with my money. And as for you, Emily, I hope your mother's sacrifice was worth it, because tonight you leave this party with exactly what you came into the world with, absolutely nothing." Margaret tried to shout, accusing me of being a monster, but her voice broke. Emily covered her face with her hands, sinking into her chair as the flashes of guests' phones captured her fall. There were no explosions, no fights. It was a surgical execution. I watched as the shine of Margaret's diamonds seemed to fade under the light of truth. She wanted to turn her daughter into a transaction. I simply closed the deal and declared them morally bankrupt. I stepped down from the stage without waiting for applause. I walked through the crowd that parted before me, like a judge in a war tribunal. As I passed Emily, she grabbed my arm, crying, begging for a moment to talk. I removed her hand with an indifference that hurt more than any insult. "The bill is paid, Emily," I whispered in her ear, "but I'm keeping the receipt." I left the hall without looking back. The night air had never felt so clean. I had destroyed my marriage, my in-laws, and the peace of my home, but I had recovered something far more valuable, my dignity and complete control over my life. The farce was over. 6 months have passed since that night in the banquet hall, And the silence in my new life is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. There were no reconciliations, no apologies, no dramatic twists of fate. The legal process was as cold and efficient as the plan that set it in motion. Margaret lost the house I had helped maintain. It turned out that without my monthly transfers, her facade of opulence was nothing more than a house of cards built on debt and lies. She now lives in a small rented apartment, far from the social circle that once served as her only oxygen. Emily tried to call me during the first few weeks, alternating between tears and threats. She accused me of humiliating her in front of the people she cared about most. My response was always the same: silence. There is nothing to discuss with someone who puts a price on their own existence and sends an invoice for love. According to the lawyers, her relationship with her mother has become toxic. They blame each other for losing the golden goose. It's the logical ending for people united only by greed. At 52, many would say I've failed because I'm alone. But I see it differently. I've cleansed my life of parasites. I've learned that loyalty is neither inherited nor something you can buy with a ring or a last name. Moral justice is not always beautiful, and it is rarely kind, but it is necessary if you want to breathe again. I feel no remorse for what I did at that party. By exposing them, I didn't just protect my assets. I held up a mirror reflecting their own actions. Sometimes people ask if I miss the companionship or the family I believed I had. My answer is simple. You cannot miss an illusion. What I had was an emotional lease agreement where I was the only one paying rent. Now my time and my resources belong solely to me. The solitude of a respected man is infinitely superior to the company of a plundered one. I have returned my focus to my work, my travels, and my own peace. The lesson I carry is that respect is not negotiable, and that family, if not built with integrity, can become the most dangerous enemy you will ever face. I do not seek revenge for pleasure, but for order, and order has been restored. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories.